You're listening to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast with Mike Chappell and Dave Griffiths.
Inside the Fox 59 CBS 4 podcast studio, welcome to another Colts Blue Zone podcast. Alongside Mike Chappell and Matt Adams, I'm Dave Griffiths. We do appreciate you tuning in to us on this day where there is a bit of a dark cloud over West 56th Street because of an NFL investigation right now into alleged gambling and a violation of the league's gambling policies. At the start of this week, there was just the first report was that it was a player, and then the rumors were kind of out there that it was Isaiah Rodgers, and then Rodgers, the Colts corner, took to social media to post a bit of an apology saying that he made, quote, mistakes and, quote, took full responsibility, end quote, for said mistakes. Obviously, Mike, this is the beginning of a story that has been at the forefront of the NFL over the past couple years since gambling, and especially sports gambling, has become legal in multiple states outside of Nevada. And the advent of apps that you can have on your phone, and it's so much more prevalent now.
A team in Vegas.
Can you imagine this 10 years ago?
No.
Exactly.
Who was it? Who was it? Tony Romo. Did he get fined or something, or told not to appear at some event in Las Vegas?
Yeah.
Because of the gambling aspect of it, and now there's a team there, so it's we've seen the Isaiah Rodgers thing it was the latest of was it 5 players were disciplined in the last 6 weeks or whatever.
Yes.
So, and there's going to be more. Mm-hmm. This is something the league has got to come to grips with, and I understand how it's strange, like you said, there's the league is in bed with the gambling entities, but you cannot have players gamble. We've got inside information because we're out there all the time. Players have all the inside. Who's practicing? Who's not? Who's in the trainer's room? You can't have players practice gambling on the NFL. Or on your own team.
It's period.
Yes, like full stop.
There's nothing beyond that because there's nothing more important to the NFL than protecting the shield.
Jim Irsay talks, protect the shield.
Then ensuring that what is being delivered to the fans is legit, that it is not fixed, that it is not pre-planned, that there is no skimming over the top of the
finger
the
on the scale or whatever.
Nothing like that. And I was asked on Twitter this week, like, why is it that the NFL treats this gambling so important, where at the same time they have different penalties, maybe less penalties for violent offenders for certain alleged crimes. And I think that that's a complicated question to answer in some part, but the easiest way to say it in 10 seconds is if people look at the NFL and think, I don't know about that, I think you're trying to pull one over on me,
WWE,
then the dominoes fall down.
Yeah, once you start thinking everything's scripted, there's already plenty of conspiracy theories about what are the refs doing and stuff like that. And there's been some suggestion, the Colts lost some games last year in kind of a weird way. And I don't think that has anything to do with this gambling allegations, but it does sometimes create the appearance of impropriety, and sometimes that's worse than there actually being an impropriety.
And Dave, you bring up a really interesting point, and I agree 100% with you. We've talked a little bit about it. Is there are some in the list of indiscretions, gambling is number one, and there's a gap between to number two. Mm-hmm. Whether it's PEDs, whether it's street drugs, whether it's some type of domestic violence, those are awful. Those are awful. But the penalties won't approach what a player betting on games and certainly betting on his own team. The hammer there is going to be massive, and we can talk about it. I anticipate an indefinite suspension. Whether it'll be a lifetime ban, I don't know that initially that's what it will be. You and I talked, it's probably an indefinite suspension where, this time next year you can reapply, and we'll either say you can reapply next year.
Right. And what it's been so far, what we have seen from players, and coaches even is that violations of this gambling policy. We've seen a couple 6-game suspensions. We've seen a couple indefinite suspensions where you can reapply for reinstatement.
Calvin Ridley was indefinite,
and that was because you're betting on NFL games, I think, or alleged betting on NFL games, I should say. That's what the reports have claimed for all the players who have been suspended, quote, indefinitely. The suspensions that have come that are just 6-game suspensions are for players who allegedly bet on non-NFL games, like on Major League Baseball or NBA games or, I don't know, the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, college football.
But they did it at team headquarters or on like a team trip, which is essentially assumed to be
team hours,
team business,
team headquarters.
You're on duty.
That is not allowed. That is where the line has been drawn for the league right now. And to kind of talk about the morality of this is again something that is a flexible reality, I think, because of just the difference between 10 years ago, what the NFL thought, and now. And when you're talking about comparing this to something like a domestic violence allegation, there are things that are like what Ray Rice did that are on video, and immediately the NFL knows, well, this can't happen. There are others where there are charges brought against somebody, and then there's a settlement, and nothing is ever pursued after that legally, like in the system. So there are things that are in some of those instances that I think come to people's minds when you say, oh, this person was accused of this. Well, it never went that far through the legal system to unveil all the facts and to make everything public and to and I'm not talking about I'm not trying to say one aspect is right or wrong here. I'm trying to give you people who are listening some insight to the NFL's reasoning behind what they do. I think a lot in the most serious cases, like the Ray Rice incident, is what I'm thinking of. Like he never played again, from what I remember.
I thought he tried to come back and
never did.
Just never did.
He never did. Things that are like the Deshaun Watson scenario is something that comes to mind. That one, Deshaun Watson was never criminally charged with anything. Like, that was always a civil case, and there's a difference between criminal and civil. And I can understand people getting upset by that and frustrated by that because the level of personal evidence against one person, like, I get it, but there needs to be a line drawn somewhere. And when it comes to violent accusations or violence by players who are accused of some things, I think we also need to understand the reality that the NFL is a violent game. And the NFL needs violent men to play their violent sport. And so that is perhaps why the NFL is more. I'm not going to make a statement right or wrong. Again, I'm trying to explain how the NFL comes at this.
But the vast majority of those guys can leave it at work.
Yes, completely.
And that's, you're right that you need the violent guys, but they need to be guys who can control their violence.
I get it. Like, I completely get it. I'm trying to just explain how the NFL comes to this conclusion.
I agree with you.
That guys who have been accused or have been charged with violent crimes will still come back and play in the league is because the league needs violent guys. And once again, I am not making a personal decision like right or wrong in that. The NFL, being an organization, a corporation, is making a corporate decision that this is a violent game. We need violent guys. So there needs to be some kind of wiggle room there.
Inflict violence.
Like, yes, there's still going to be punishment.
Right.
But there needs to be some wiggle room there. And for them, it's much worse. For the NFL, it is much worse to have an appearance of games that are fixed or appearance of games that are not natural due to gambling than it would be to have the appearance of a violent game, because it is a violent game, so is what I'm trying to say.
Gambling will never, ever be a part of the league, ever.
Right.
It can't be. Like for all the things you've mentioned, it can't be, because then, like you said, and Matt mentioned, then when something happens, a quarterback fumbles a snap, a receiver drops a wide open ball, whatever, you're thinking, I wonder. Mm-hmm. Because you see movies where that's the case. Can't have it. Once you have the doubt slip in that, well, maybe this isn't on the up and up, your enterprise is dead.
So from Isaiah Rodgers' post on Monday, I'll give you a little bit more from it. Quote, "I've let people down that I care about. I made an error in judgment, and I'm going to work hard to make sure that those mistakes are rectified through this process. It's an honor to play in the NFL, and I've never taken that lightly. I'm very sorry for all this." So the Colts are aware of the investigation. Shane Steichen did his best deflection this week when he was asked about it over and over. Did not have too much to say. Talked a little bit about what the league does in terms of educating players, which
and the league's in town this week.
Very coincidentally, the league is in town.
Ironically, it was whatever word, but it was scheduled.
Yeah, it might creep into the realm of irony because of the certain scenario exactly of what's going down. But the deal is, and talking to other players, it seems like they know. Like there's no. It's not too complicated as to what you're allowed to do.
Ignorance
what you're not
is not a defense.
No, and ignorance, even if you don't know, it's not a defense. Like you have to know. You don't bet at team headquarters. You don't bet on the NFL. Boom. Or like talking to a guy like Kylan Granson this week, or EJ Speed. They're like, just don't do it. Like there's too much that can go wrong. Just forget about it. And what are you doing betting $50, $100 here and there anyway? Like you're making like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars anyway. If you're making these small bets, like you say, well, what's the point of it? I think that's a hard thing. Like as I say it, that's hard. That's really hard. It's not the best, I don't think, argument against it. So I would say forget I said that, because for some people it is something that is just an itch they have to scratch. So forget that I was saying it like that.
I was going to say, I think this shows you that whatever disease, addiction, whatever you want to call it, people have it. I used to gamble a lot just because you get a buzz. You do. Yep. And you get to the point that you don't care if your team won. Did they cover?
Right.
Which is, you know who the gamblers are when they say, did they cover?
Good teams win. Great teams cover.
But what I think where it shows you the level of itch is when a player can't even wait to drive down to the Starbucks on whatever it is, 56th Street or whatever it is, Georgetown, and place a bet. You do it at the complex. So it's obvious he's got a problem. You know, these guys that have been caught, the 4 or 5 Detroit Lions and the Washington Commander guy, they've got it. It's a problem. And you don't mean to make light of it, but like you said, ignorance is not an excuse. These players, they've been told, the league meets these players every year. I'm sure the team has seminars, whatever, that these players know. And it's hard for me to believe that any player in the NFL doesn't realize you can't bet 1 on the NFL, 2 on your team.
Right.
So it maybe that shows you the level of addiction that it can be. But I saw the one thing that Isaiah said, well, I hope to rectify this situation through the process. Well, there's not much you can do.
Except to sit out.
You've done your part.
Right.
So now, again, the issue is going to be is how heavy is the hammer, and it's going to be heavy. Mm-hmm. So, when, that's a good question, when. I would hope from the team standpoint that it's sooner rather than later. This, and we can get into it later, this is, of all the positions on the team, this is from a team standpoint, not a personal standpoint. I'm not sure I could have picked a better or a worse area to hit, to lose a top player, cornerback. But they're going to have to scramble, either really go young this year or try to find a veteran in June, which is never an easy thing to do.
I was going to say, there are some cornerbacks out there on the market right now, Matt. Like I was looking at some of the just the list earlier, and who'd we say, Chap, that was just signed by the Bills?
Dantzler.
Yeah, Cam Dantzler, cornerback. I think Marcus Peters is available out there. There's a couple other guys. Ronald Darby, I think, is another name that's out there. So there are some, if we want to talk football from this standpoint, like you have Kenny Moore, who's an experienced cornerback right now, and after that, there's basically nothing. No, it's nothing. So if you want somebody experienced on the outside playing cornerback to help groom some of these young guys that you just drafted, they need to go get somebody.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Again, when we say there's nothing there, we're not talking about from a talent standpoint. We're talking purely from an experience standpoint. Dallas Flowers doesn't have much experience. Rodgers himself, even if he's able to play, which he's not going to be able to, doesn't have much experience. And then they drafted two guys who were expected to have a big contributing role here in the secondary. So yeah, they've got to look at the veteran somewhere.
And last year it was all everyone was seeing Chap. It was Brandon Faison was playing, and everyone was asking, why isn't Isaiah Rodgers playing? That was kind of the over and over again question earlier in the year.
And Isaiah ended up starting 9 games.
He did end up starting more later. Yes.
So and again, on top of that, you're losing your best return guy. Mm-hmm. So the only way this would have been worse is if this happened, if this came out like in mid-June, and the team didn't know about it until camp was over and all this, because right now you haven't had. I don't think the team knew about this until Monday. Mm-hmm. The fact they drafted 3 corners, that's just coincidence.
They needed corners
anyway. Anyway.
Yeah.
But if this had happened in May, then you're probably more active. Not more active. You're active in free agency to get your corner, because then he's got the opportunity to go through your off-season work. Whoever you bring in now, if you bring somebody in, his first really chance to practice will be in training camp.
Yeah.
So it's not a good situation for the team, and it's an awful situation for the player.
Now, I'm trying to think of positions that would be worse to lose a guy like on this roster, and I think Bernard Ryman might be one of them, or Braden Smith, like one of your outside tackles, might be worse just because of who's behind them. But like even if you lose one of the 2 quarterbacks, you have another quarterback. They're like, okay, we'll just give it to Anthony Richardson. See what he does. Oh, okay, we'll just give it to Gardner Minshew. He's experienced.
I mean, if
you lose Michael Pittman Jr., then you still have Alec Pierce, who has a good amount of experience.
If it's one of your really core guys, if it's JT, that's different.
Well, of course, yes.
But no.
But I mean, you still have guys who are experienced really behind them.
Right. The lack of it. I always try to remind people that when Tony Dungy always used to get on me because I'd say, well, you've got a lack of depth at this position. He said, no, we don't. Well, every team's got depth. You got players.
Right.
It's the quality of the depth. And it just so happens that they're going to lose a projected starter at a position where they really couldn't afford to do it.
Yeah.
I think the only position where they would be thin and would be maybe linebacker if Shaq Leonard couldn't play and you had somebody suspended. They don't have a lot of depth there. Yeah. But I don't think it's as dire as the secondary.
Yeah, you'd have Zaire obviously and EJ Speed, but and then after that, because that was a position that we thought they might address in the draft, and they never did.
And they didn't. Right. So and maybe they'll bring in a mid-tier veteran guy, closer to camp or something.
Yeah. So if we're looking at what's going to happen next, Chap, if it's just minor allegations like we talked about, if it's non-NFL games is what the investigation unveils, then it's probably going to be 6 games like we've seen. If it's going to be betting on NFL games, indefinite suspension, and then a possibility to be reinstated after 1 year, which is what has happened to Calvin Ridley, reinstated now. If it is deemed that Isaiah Rodgers or anybody now in the NFL has bet on his own team or in a game where his own team has played, God forbid, against your own team, or if you say, well, Matt Ryan's over-under for interceptions in this game is 1/2, I think he's going to throw at least 1. So even if you play defense and you have nothing to do with that, you put money on over Matt Ryan interceptions. If you bet on
which
your
is why
team,
players can't gamble, right?
Exactly. If you bet on your team or against your team, you say it's still possible to see, quote, indefinite suspension comes out. But if that's the case, I would find it highly unlikely that Isaiah Rodgers returns to football, at least anytime soon, within year or years.
I guess I'd just be surprised that the term banishment is in the discipline.
Okay.
Because I don't know that have they ever had that? Have they ever banished a player? I can't remember what the Aaron Hernandez thing was, how that worked out. That's different. That's totally different. The term indefinite suspension sort of, it keeps banishment in the ballpark.
Right.
So, but again, if you bet on your own team, that's an area you can't go to, and it'll be very curious if the league takes that strong of a stance. And then, what does the NFLPA do? They've got to agree the players cannot bet.
Right.
So how do you go to bat for a player if he gets really a severe penalty? This is going to be severe. The question is how severe.
So it's kind of a quote unquote permanent suspension if that's the case, if you're just indefinitely suspended, and it would be less likely for the NFLPA to fight you in that sense, I guess is what Chap's saying here. So so if we hear indefinite suspension, that doesn't just mean 1 year, Matt. It could be much longer than that.
Yeah, and I think it'll probably be an unspoken lifetime ban.
Unspoken. If that's the case,
if that's the case, if he bet on the Colts for or against and multiple times, and it's really, really bad, a lot of transactions, whether he did it or through a third party, it doesn't even matter. Then I think it might be it. But I think Mike's probably right. I think they'll probably not come right out and say that.
I think sportshandle.com is who had the story initially. And again, citing sources, and is you just have to decide whether you want to trust the sources. I generally do with certain things. They called it pervasive gambling with Rodgers, and at the time they didn't mention his name. And they mentioned that he bet over 100 times. There were over 100 bets placed, and that it was on NFL games, and I believe it did say that there were Colts games.
It did. That original report did say that.
And I have seen nothing to come out since then to refute anything that they put out there. Again, some sites and some posts I really, really question, and some I don't. And then ESPN came up with this with Stephen Holder. And we heard things. Chris Hagan heard things.
Yep.
And you just couldn't confirm it.
Right.
And it's easy for some people to throw things out there before you really can confirm it. And we can't do that. You have to have a level of of what you can go with. But we have not heard by any means the end of this. And the only thing that remains is how heavy will the hammer be, and this isn't if, it's when.
Yeah, it's understandable that this is going to be a tight-lipped investigation because of the sensitivity of the topic.
But how much more do you need to know?
Right, exactly. That's what I was getting at.
His Twitter thing said basically, yeah, I did it.
Exactly.
And I'm sorry I did it. Now, I guess maybe for the severity. But again, if the league has already found out that he bet on one Colts game, isn't that enough?
I think it is.
Instead of 10 or 15, I don't know what level, how much in depth you need to go on your investigation when you know that he did this, and this. We don't know the exact number of thises he did, because I don't know that it matters, especially if you bet on NFL games, and certainly if you bet on your own team, and if you bet on your own team to lose.
Even worse, if that's
you're trying to find what is the more worst case scenario, and I would question any Colts player betting on his team in November and December last year. As much of a train wreck as that was.
Absolutely.
But so this is going to be tragic. It's bad for the team from a personnel standpoint. I guess from an image standpoint, although they did nothing wrong in this. But personally, this is potentially a career killer.
Yeah. For
a guy that's 25.
Devastating for him, for his family.
He's burned away $2.7 million this year.
Right.
And if he had had a decent year this year, what's his extension? $6 or $7 million a year.
Depends on how good he is.
For a second
It's his second contract in the NFL, man. That's huge. That's what players play for, to get to that second contract. Once you did that, you've made it. The NFL stands for not for long for a reason, because there's guys like Ben Banigou who you think flame out, but now apparently has a job in Dallas for somehow. They saw something.
But he won't get much. That's a minimum.
Exactly. But for big contracts,
Rodgers would have gotten, if he had played well,
starting cornerback salary.
Which is $6-7 million minimum.
Exactly, and that's for multiple years. That's at least a 2-year contract.
I feel for him, but this is a him problem.
At the same time, it's like this is the bed that you have made. This is the grave that you have dug.
Consequences.
Yeah.
And I'm not as familiar with the Detroit and Commanders case with those guys that are suspended indefinitely. Do you guys know, were they accused of betting on their own team?
No, those were alleged Just betting on the NFL, not on their own team.
Okay.
From what I understand.
I do recall that. I do recall reading that.
Yeah.
So, which would then make this Isaiah Rodgers case kind of a first case, test case, which means the hammer's going to drop.
Right, and that's what Pete Rose was accused of. If we compare it back to baseball, and he did, betting on his own team, on the Reds. He claims he always bet on the Reds to win, but that's still not acceptable. That is still what the NFL's team. No, it's not enough.
And it's 2022 or 2023, and people are still saying reinstate Pete.
Oh yeah. So doesn't go away so easily. But this brings us the Colts right now to a position we touched on this earlier. But Juju Brents will be out there. Darius Rush will be out there. Jalen Jones.
Maybe Rush more than we thought initially.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So you have those three guys that you drafted. Daryl Baker is another corner you've had on your team who's seen action in a couple games.
They've started some during OTAs. They've had Dallas Flowers on one side and
right.
Tony Brown on the other side, with allowing Kenny Moore to really work inside more, which is what they want to do.
You have to keep Kenny inside. That's
what he's best at, man.
Exactly. If you want Kenny, like if you want what you've paid him for, if you want what, and that's a reasonable question from fans. I think is why don't you move Kenny outside? Well, Kenny's good inside. Like Kenny is dynamic inside. That's why it's another reason why you don't move Quentin Nelson to tackle because that's not what he does. He's not a pro. He's not an all pro out there. Kenny is a Pro Bowl interior nickel corner who can make great plays in the slot, is a very good slot cornerback. He had a down year last year, I think. He has some real questions to answer coming into this year, but we know the talent he has because we've seen him make big plays for this team in the past from that position, which is what he's really good at. So you drafted all these guys because you think that they can maybe be outside quarterbacks because you know that Kenny is your inside quarterback.
Right, and you like the size on the outside too, and that's what these new corners bring.
Yep, you got to have size on the outside. Like I remember the days when I was growing up. I don't know if you remember, Chap, but this might be a name from the past. But old Jets cornerback Mark McMillan was like 5'4" or 5'5". And that gave me hope as a young, small boy in 1992 who opened up his Topps trading cards, who saw a quarterback was 5'5" in the NFL. I said, maybe I could be there one day. But no, here I am instead talking in an illustrious studio with various television and audio paraphernalia, chatting about other players who are in the NFL with you fine gentlemen here today.
One of the guys they drafted were, Brents is 6'3", and the other two guys, Rush and Jones, are 6'2".
Yep.
And that's where they want to go now. And actually the one that will benefit most from this unfortunate situation probably is Rush, because he'll be thrust up the depth chart quicker maybe than what they anticipated.
Yeah, I'd already had Brent's pretty much penciled in at being where he was picked and kind of his pedigree that he would be their day one starter. And then that second outside starter, I wasn't sure. Maybe Rush, maybe somebody else. Darius Rush.
Yeah.
But, maybe Isaiah Rodgers, maybe Dallas Flowers. But now it's kind of looking like odds are better for Rush than they were.
Yeah, we are gonna wrap up a little bit early today. We had some timing concerns here. So many people want to be inside this room, guys. I mean, it is.
I see why.
It is a bastion of media excellence that we are kind of limited in our
multi-purpose
time.
room.
Exactly, but that's the only thing that is of relevance right now. I think that most Colts fans are talking about. Like, is Anthony Richardson still out at OTAs? Yes,
still got to be on.
He's still going to be there, so we'll see him next week when it's mandatory minicamp. So we'll have plenty more to talk about then, a little bit more on the field. We encourage you to subscribe, get us delivered to your podcast listening device as soon as it drops every week here throughout the off season and beyond, when pretty soon the season is going to come up. But for Mike Chappell, follow his work online, mchappell51 on Twitter, at fox59.com, cbs4indy.com. Matt Adams is at Statomatty on Twitter. I'm Dave Griffiths at DaveG_sports. We'll see you next week on the Colts Blue Zone podcast.